Okay, let's get started. I know there'll be some more people joining us as we go, but we want to make sure that we get through everything we need to today in the time we have. So we have about 90 minutes with our esteemed group of panelists. My name is Mark Cooper. I'm the president and CEO of the Saskatchewan Construction Association, and here today as a member of the Saskatchewan Business Council, which is hosting this this town hall. And so the Saskatchewan Business Council includes 20 different business organizations from across Saskatchewan, and the group is represented there by the CEOs of those organizations, and collectively the Business Council represents most of the businesses in Saskatchewan. So we're glad today to co-host this infrastructure town hall, which is a discussion with a handful of senior officials from the government of Saskatchewan to talk about their new infrastructure investment plan that is designed to help stimulate the economy here in Saskatchewan through the recovery from COVID. So with that, let's dive into getting to know our panelists a little bit. I'm going to ask each of them to give a minute or so introduction of who they are and the ministry that they represent. And so we're going to start with Mr. Kent Campbell. Kent?
Thanks, Mark. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm muting myself there. Yeah, so I'm Kent Campbell. I'm Deputy Minister, Ministry of Trade and Export Development, which of course includes all things trade and exports, but it's also the government's economic development agency. So we do a lot of work in terms of investment attraction and competitiveness as it relates to the Saskatchewan economy. And in relation to this COVID-19 pandemic, we're also providing a lot of the coordination around some of the planning, as well as delivering some different programs and services. One you might be familiar with is the business response team, which is a call center function which we set up shortly after this became a serious issue, and we redeployed a bunch of our staff to that function. And then we're also working with the Ministry of Finance. We set up the Small Business Emergency Payment Program, and so we're administering some programs like that. And we do a lot of liaison work with the various associations. So we have, I think I'm on 3 calls a week with the Business Council, and connecting with the various associations just to get a sense of, what's happening out there, what the issues are, working with obviously the federal government and other provinces as well. So that's a bit of a description, Mark, of my role and our role at TED.
Perfect. Thank you, Kent. Thank you for joining us this morning and making time. And next we have Fred Antunes from Highways. Fred?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm Fred Antunes. I'm the Deputy Minister of Highways. I've joined Highways about 3 years ago. I've spent the last 10 years before that. This is my second tour with Highways. The last 10 years before that, I spent working in both design as an engineering consultant and as a contractor. So I'm kind of familiar with a lot of the work that we do, especially when it comes to infrastructure. I'm responsible for the Ministry of Highways. So we basically look after about 26,000 kilometers of highway. We operate 720 bridges, 62,000 culverts, 12 ferries, 1 barge, and 16 airports, believe it or not. We typically deliver on an annual basis about $350 million worth of construction work. And the way that we do that is we usually put out a fall tender schedule in probably September that commits 65% of future years funding. And then we put out a tender schedule again in the spring that gives the rest of the funding out on the market. And we do that because we want to get all the work done over the winter so that we can crush and haul when the roads are frozen. The type of work that we typically do is bridge rehabs, replacement, grading, paving, aggregate processing, seal coating, microsurfacing, rubber asphalt, crack sealing, the typical gamut. We also buy a lot of supplies to maintain our equipment fleet. We have one of the largest equipment fleets in the province. So there's the work that goes out to the sector that way. The majority of the work that we do is delivered by contractors. All the capital work is done by the construction industry. We don't do any capital work ourselves. And then when it comes to the design consulting, we typically do about 5% of the engineering in-house. The rest of the engineering is all done externally to us. I guess when it comes to what's been happening with COVID lately, we've been involved in developing some safety guidelines for civil infrastructure, working with the Heavy Construction Safety Association, the Ministry of Highways, ACEC, the consulting engineers, as well as Water Security Agency to develop some guidelines around safety protocols on construction. And all of our construction projects are proceeding as planned right now. We've got multiple crews already out in the field doing work around the province. The other thing that we've done recently is we've incorporated into our tenders in response to COVID and some of the economic crisis that's happening. I'm sure we'll talk about this later. Some benefits around community some provisions around community benefits that will help create jobs in Saskatchewan, we think.
Perfect. Thank you, Fred. I think the coolest part of that by far is the barge. I think the barge is the key. Okay, next, let's hear from Sheldon Green with Government Relations. Sheldon.
Hi, thanks, Mark, and thanks to the council for the invitation. I'll just say I'm sitting in for my deputy minister today, Greg Miller, who sends his regrets that he can't join us. I'm the assistant deputy minister for the municipal relations division, so we've got community planning, municipal infrastructure and finance, northern municipal services, and advisory services and sector relations are under my portfolio. So I think the big connection to today's topic is that we've got some discrete pieces that fit into the stimulus plan. And while our ministry doesn't procure infrastructure ourselves, we do have some fast-moving programs that we're looking forward to chatting with you about here today. We've got some existing programs that are legacy that we're continuing to administer to municipal infrastructure specifically. And what we'll talk about a little bit this morning is chunks that I know the PowerPoint that we'll get into in a minute, $150 million per capita program that we've been directed to stand up very quickly. You will have probably read about that in the media. We'll get into some of the details of that. We've got about $165 million of existing programs of various kinds, some of them legacy and sunsetting, some of them ongoing in a variety of pots. And then also I think exciting for our municipal sector is the direction we received last week, which is to advance record levels of municipal revenue sharing program funding. 278 million, we're going to be accelerating that. Typically we'd spread it out through the year. In this case, we're going to spend it all in the month of June. So we're going to be advancing that, and I can make some further comments in that, on those items as needed in a bit. Let me get into your questions. So just again, thanks for a very critical discussion, Mark, and through Mark to the council for organizing today, and I'm looking forward to sharing in the discussion.
Thanks, Sheldon, and it's great to have you with us here today. Next, let's hear from Miguel Morrissette from SaskBuilds. Miguel.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Miguel Morrissette. I'm Vice President of Infrastructure Development with SaskBuilds. Our area is responsible for a few things. One is the provincial capital planning process, which is a part of this design of the stimulus package, I guess. So every year we review the capital priorities of all the ministries across government, including Treasury Board Crown. So we're looking at highways and hospitals and schools, trying to help Cabinet decide what the next priorities are for major infrastructure. We're also involved in coordinating federal infrastructure funding. So we're the conduit with the Government of Canada for matching projects up to programs effectively. So we're always in negotiation on trying to get Saskatchewan the most money we can for our capital priorities. And then the other area is project delivery. We're responsible for major project delivery. In the past, SaskBuilds has done obviously the big P3 projects, but we're also involved in a number of different major capital projects going on right now across the spectrum, from kind of traditional to, of course, monitoring the P3s that are now completed. I think that's a high-level overview of what we're up to.
Thanks, Miguel. Next, we'll hear from Kyle. And Kyle, just before you do, I'm going to jump in and say something. But then Kyle's going to introduce himself, and then he'll get into a PowerPoint presentation to review a little bit on the plan. I will say, for those who submitted questions ahead of time, we did get your questions, and we have sent them out to the panelists, and so we will take time to go through those that did come in ahead of time. I would also encourage, I see we already have our first question in the Q&A feature, so do feel free to post questions in there, and we will get to them, but we're just going to go through this this presentation, hear from Kyle, and get into a few preliminary questions, and then we'll dive into your audience questions, so do feel free to put them in there. Kyle, tell us a little bit about yourself, SaskBuilds, and then take us through your presentation, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Of course, Kyle Toffan, President and CEO of SaskBuilds Corporation. Miguel gave a little bit of an overview about our infrastructure practice through his infrastructure development division, but we also play a very key role for executive government on procurement. So we do have the single procurement service, which is a one window approach to procurement of goods, services, and construction projects across government. We work closely with Fred's team, of course, from a highway standpoint, but also central services, parks, culture, and sport, and others as well that do infrastructure and other types of procurement. We also have what many of you would be familiar with in Priority Saskatchewan. Priority Saskatchewan is focused on many different things, but one of the key factors is supplier development and ensuring that our companies stay strong in our province. And also they keep a close ear to the ground on what's happening out there and keep a pulse of the industry. What I would say is that that approach has given us the opportunity to listen and also to change our programs to meet the needs of our province. And we'll get into a little bit about what that means for infrastructure shortly. But obviously, SaskBuilds is a little bit of a unique organization. We are a Treasury Board Crown Corporation. We're not a ministry. And we do work closely with Crown corporations, commercial crowns that is, on their procurement and their capital planning as well, especially on federal funding opportunities. So I'll just share my screen if I can do that here. And we'll jump right into the presentation. I won't take up too much time here today on presentation, but I am very interested in everyone's questions to make sure we have some time to go through those. So building a strong Saskatchewan, hopefully everyone can see this, this first slide here. Really, the focus of this will be on the stimulus program delivery plan, but I want to mention a few things before that. This is about $7.5 billion commitment over the next 2 years, which may take a little bit longer than 2 years to spend, but a commitment of $7.5 billion is unprecedented for our province. And this is part of the $30 billion commitment in the growth plan for infrastructure spending, including Crown spending. The $2 billion spend that was announced last week on Wednesday is in addition to a $5.5 billion that already is committed in the base budget and also for major capital, which I'll go through a little bit of a list of what that looks like shorter term and longer term. What I would say is that we listened as well as we could from industry on what a stimulus program could do for the province. And that's why we've structured it the way we have with smaller sort of shovel-ready projects, $181 million worth of them, frankly, to jumpstart the economy right now and get people back to work as quickly as possible. And in the meantime, also focus on $300 million worth of highways and infrastructure spend. Some of that is for passing lanes and some of it is for municipal programs. And there's some other initiatives that Fred can talk about a little bit. And then really after that, spend some time on engineering, architectural services, project management on those really large initiatives so that we can get those ready for construction next year. And also to carry forward in the years to come to smooth out the capital spend. What we've heard from industry a lot is that we tend to spike on our capital budget and then we don't spend as much in the years after the spike. And so we're trying to really smooth that out. The base renewal budget, I won't speak about this too much, but as I mentioned, this is the $5.5 billion, excluding Crown corporations. This is information that is posted in the Saskatchewan Builds capital plan as part of the budget that's released every year. So I won't go through the numbers, but what I want to talk about a little bit are the large infrastructure projects that were approved in the 2020 budget, or at least presented in the 2021 budget. So we do have the Prince Albert Victoria Hospital, that's part of that initial capital commitment, the Weyburn General Hospital, and we do have a whole series of school projects as well, and this ranges from St. Francis Elementary School to Carrot River. Obviously, there's some new schools required in Regina and Saskatoon. I won't go through the whole list, but definitely it shows a strong commitment that was already in place when government put forward their budget plan a couple months back. In addition to that, as you saw in the announcement last week, we do have a $2 billion stimulus funding package. 181 million of that is for those initiatives that are really shovel ready and also maybe more rehab in nature or maintenance in nature. We do have a laundry list of projects here that we are looking to get out for announcements shortly. Hopefully next week this will start, and leading into the following week likely. We can't announce that list of projects right now, but we're getting very close to doing so. Large infrastructure projects, these are the ones that we were talking about a little bit earlier about streamlining engineering and architectural services. These initiatives will probably range from about 10 million all the way through to hundreds of millions of dollars, and are yet to be announced and approved, and are subject to some pretty significant business planning work that will occur over the next 6 months. Highway stimulus package, there was an announcement yesterday on $300 million worth of very good projects. And there was actually a map that Fred and his team released as part of that news release that I felt was really helpful to see that we aren't just focusing on one area of the province, it's really geographically dispersed. And I would say that that's on purpose. This is not something that we went into blindly and just, picked the top 2 on our list and went with them. It's really a strategy that we've employed on this package to try to get Saskatchewan companies back to work. And then Sheldon was pointing out $150 million on the Municipal Economic Enhancement Program. This is similar to a program that was done in 2009 with municipalities, paid per capita, and intended to be mostly unconditional in nature, as long as it's paid towards capital projects. A couple key points on this: SaskBuilds will have a key role on managing these funds. These will be invested over the next 2 years. We have a strong desire, as do many of you, I assume, on the call, and you're working very hard towards this, to make sure that projects are on time and on budget. And local engagement and delivery using Saskatchewan companies is absolutely paramount on this $2 billion stimulus package, and we'll talk a little bit about how we plan on doing that. And we really do want your good ideas on other ways we can do this as well. So the stimulus renewal funding allocations, we talked about 181 million. This is what we are looking at as far as a time frame. It's really over that 2-year period worth of spend, a little bit less in this fiscal year, ramping up to around $109 million in next year. You will see that healthcare maintenance capital is about $100 million, so very, very significant, with education capital being 25 for almost $26 million. And then the rest of the infrastructure spend being spread out across government. We are working with these ministries and agencies closely right now and gearing up to get the RFP and tender documents out in the coming weeks. Highway stimulus package, I talked about $300 million. This was part of an announcement that went out yesterday. And I know Fred has some notes to talk about here, so I'll just pass it off to him, if you don't mind, Fred, to give kind of a couple-minute overview.
Sure. So in terms of the investment or the types of projects that we're doing, I mean, these all tie back to the growth plan that was announced. There was commitments in the growth plan related to upgrading TMS roads and building passing lanes. So these are consistent with that plan. In addition to that, I think that we've had people say, well, why didn't you do a bunch more resurfacing or things like that? These projects that were selected, the types of projects that they are the type that are going to actually build capacity and build for the future by providing either more transportation efficiency, more safety, or higher weights on different roads. So that's a little bit different than doing some traditional resurfacing where you just basically build what you currently have. So these are all upgrades. So overall, there's going to be about $150 million invested on 325 kilometers of rural thin membrane surface highways. So these are the highways that are typically break up in the spring that were never really designed to carry any weight. So we're going to fix a bunch of those. There's going to be a number of spot improvement contracts that go out this year. And I think 1 or 2 of these projects will get done this year. They're already designed. The majority of the work, though, will be done, is being designed this year, tendered over the winter and crushed over the winter and delivered next year. The passing lanes are the same thing. There's $100 million to get us 24 to 26 sets of passing lanes on some of the major highways around the province. And basically what this investment has allowed us to do is take stuff that was on our long range plan and accelerate it and bring it forward. So these are projects that we're already looking at. One consultant is already engaged on one of the sets of passing lanes, but we will be going to market, get consultants to do the rest of the design so that we can, again, tender them over the winter and start construction on them next year. The other aspect that we've got is some money that we're going to be putting into municipal roads and airports. So the ministry does provide some funding through SARM to the municipalities to build and upgrade some of their rural municipal roads, which tie into our roads. And then we have a number of roads around the province that are allowed to carry primary weights that are municipal roads. So the investment that we're going to be making on the municipal system, there's going to be about $46 million, and we cap how much funding goes to the municipalities. So that's going to leverage quite a bit more funding than the $46 million to allow us to build about 100 projects on the grid road system over the next 2 to 3 years. And the other advantage to that is that the type of work that we typically do on TMS and passing lanes is more grading and surfacing, or more surfacing. This will allow some work for the earth building industry as well, or the kind of the heavy civil contractors do a lot of earth work. That'll allow some work for them as well. And in addition to that, we have a community airport program that's cost shared with municipalities on local airport improvements. So we're going to be able to do 15 airport improvement projects over the next couple of years as well. I want to go to the next slide, Kyle. So what we're going to do in terms of delivering this, not a lot of this design work is done on this. We have to do the design work this year. So we're, in order to deliver this, we're going to create a small project team within the ministry. Basically 3 staff is all the ministry is going to use to manage this. We're going to hire an owner's engineer, just like we did on the Regina Bypass project. And that owner's engineer is going to basically do all of the work that our staff would normally do to review submission packages and get the designs approved and get them out the door. That owner's engineer will manage a series of consultants that we'll hire to design all of the different work, and then also do the construction management when the jobs get out in the field. For the design side, we're looking at doing streamlined procurement, single stage procurement, where you just go to market and get prices. Hope to have everybody hired and the consultants in place by the end of June so that we can get the work done. And we had a meeting with the consulting industry last week, and really what we told them is that, you know, we're geared to get this work done this year. This is not about building backlog. We only want you to build on stuff that you can realistically get done, so that we can make sure that all of this work gets designed and we can put it on the market this winter.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that, Fred. And what I will say on top of what Fred just mentioned was that his team is just ready to go. Some of these tender packages are already coming to market. We knew that highways would be the most prepared, I would say, to hit the market quickly. And that's why we structured it this way, with the announcement coming out yesterday, to show that we're already making progress. Frankly, I mean, it's only been a week since the announcement and we're already getting documents out. So it shows that we did do our due diligence, did do our planning, and we'll continue to do that over the course of the coming weeks and months. In addition to the maintenance type spending, as I talked about really early on, large infrastructure projects, $1.37 billion. It's a significant amount of funding for major initiatives, ranging, as I said, from $10 million all the way through to hundreds of millions. Our focus, in particular with Miguel's team leading, is on business cases, engineering, and architectural services in this year. And we do want some really good ideas from the market on how we can do this. And in fact, they're meeting with some folks from ACEC, I believe tomorrow, to get the ball rolling on some of that. We have some ideas as well and have been doing some lifting on that, but we haven't made any decisions on how that will roll out, but are getting closer. What I will mention as well is a lot of these large infrastructure projects require federal funding, and we will be looking to the feds for our more transformational type initiatives. These will really transform our economy and the jobs of the future. The other point I want to make on this is that there's over $100 million dedicated for health, which was announced as part of the Premier's presentation last week. And there's also well over $100 million for education type initiatives on this stimulus package. So yet to be determined what the projects are. We're doing business case analysis similar to our integrated capital planning process requirements, and we'll come out with more information in the future. Talked about municipal stimulus funding, the MEEP program already, and Sheldon mentioned it as well. But one thing we haven't touched on too much is the Investing in Canada infrastructure program and the status of that work. I do have a couple slides with lists of projects already approved, and there's more coming. But Sheldon, did you want to give just a few points on this, on where your team is at with municipal infrastructure with the federal government?
For sure. Thanks, Kyle. As many of you may know, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program is open for an intake right now. We've had it open since late December. It was originally slated to close on the 31st. When the 31st came, of course, we were in a new reality, as everybody knows. So the province made the decision to extend that deadline to tomorrow. But we have begun analysis of project applications that have come in under the green stream and the community and culture and recreation streams. Right now, we've got approximately 300 projects in the hopper. We'll be looking to move as quickly as possible and advance recommended projects to Canada. I think I'll leave it at there for now, Kyle, unless there's more specific questions.
Sure, and just one thing that I will add to what Sheldon said is that we are working closely with the federal government on flexibility for this funding. Yeah. We've really struggled over the last couple of years since we signed the agreement to have Canada recognize that Saskatchewan is a little bit different and has unique opportunities to invest on infrastructure. We're not alone on this. I would say that there's probably at least 6 provinces that have voiced concerns on the lack of flexibility through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. As some of you might have seen yesterday, to deal with this requirement and this ask of provinces, the federal government has come out with a new funding stream. It's to deal with COVID-19. So they've basically repackaged dollars, which in our case is around $896 million in federal funding, and allowed 10% of that, or around 89 million, to be used for that new stream. So we're still getting details on what that means for us, but we're hoping that that will at least alleviate some of our concerns on the lack of flexibility. There are a list of projects that have already been approved. These were approved last year. They are proceeding along the lines of Aboriginal consultations and also some environmental assessment. Some of them are proceeding to construction as well. Another thing that we've sort of struggled with a little bit from the federal government is just their processes for getting a shovel in the ground. A lot of these projects were approved last year, almost 12 months ago, and most of them haven't even started construction yet. But we have received assurances from our colleagues at the federal government through Infrastructure Canada that these will proceed to construction for the most part very soon. So that's good news as well, and provides another layer of economic stimulus for industry that wasn't part of the announcement last week per se, but definitely is above and beyond anything that we've announced. So I won't get into too much detail about these. I just wanted to put them on the screen. Mark can share this presentation, I assume, after, so everyone can kind of take a look at these, and of course it'll be recorded. So I'll just leave a couple seconds on each of these slides. So why did we do this? Why did we do a $2 billion booster shot? Really, it was to ensure that there's strong benefits to the provincial economy, strong benefits to our local labor, and really benefits to our companies. So how are we going to do that? I know that there's a lot of questions coming through on, is this work going to benefit Saskatchewan business? Yeah, it's going to. And we're going to work super hard to make sure that it does. We have very strong direction from our cabinet and from our political leaders and from my board to make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned, frankly. So we have developed a new strategy unit within the single procurement service of SaskBuilds recently, and have engaged a consultant to look at all of our options within trade agreement, and also potentially look at community benefits for not just for highways. Highways has already gone down this path, and SaskBuilds has worked closely with them, but also for other types of infrastructure. So what is community benefits? I know there's been some maybe negative connotations on this term because of what British Columbia and others have done. For us, what it means so far is that we will look at Saskatchewan labor as a key benefit through our capital initiatives, and will in fact provide points to it. during procurement. We will also on the back end ensure that whatever was put in people's proposals are adhered to, and if not, we are looking at penalties. So if you are saying in your proposal that you are going to engage 100% of Saskatchewan citizens for your labor, then you will obviously get the highest points. We will also be looking at improved local knowledge provisions. So this is things like, do you understand our weather? Do you understand our climate? Do you appreciate our soil conditions? Do you understand our First Nations community? So that's another thing that we've done a little bit in the past through requests for qualifications and some other things, but we want to dig in a little bit deeper on that. An important part of our work will continue to be industry engagement and solicitation, but it's going to be different now. It will be more aligned with individual projects, and we will be putting resources to industry engagement for key initiatives on capital. Review of procurements that are awarded to non-Saskatchewan companies. What does this mean? This means that if for some reason the tools that we use lead to a non-Saskatchewan company winning a piece of work, we need to ask the question, why? And there's two things that we're going to be doing on that. We're going to be looking at whether there's a supplier development opportunity. So maybe there's no crack sealing companies, rubber crack sealing companies in Saskatchewan that typically bid that type of work through highways. We're going to ask why. And then we're going to have Priority Saskatchewan take a look at whether we can build up a little bit of an industry here locally. And we'll be creative on how we can get those companies to get some experience in the area should they not have any. And then just a little bit more on supplier development. We need to put some resources towards this, and it's not just supplier development of our general contractors. It's also supplier development of our supply chain. And I know SIMSA has talked about this a lot. I've had conversations with Eric about this. We believe that community benefit approaches will have benefit for not just general contractors, but also subs and sub-subs and supply chain. Because if you're saying you're engaging 100% Saskatchewan labor, that also means where you're getting your materials from. I know there's going to be questions on this, and I welcome them, obviously with open arms, because we need to do this right. And these are just some suggestions on how we're going to provide the benefit to local economy on this $2 billion booster shot, and really for the whole $7.5 billion investment that Saskatchewan has taken here. So I'm going to leave it at that. We took about 35 minutes there for the presentation introductions, and that leaves us quite a bit of time for questions. I'll pass it off to Mark.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, so we've got lots of questions coming in through the Q&A feature, which is great. And I think we're going to start with a couple that maybe will come to you first on Fred. From Susan Ewart, who I'm sure you know from the Trucking Association, she asks, will any of the new highway improvements include upgrades for rest areas or pullouts for commercial vehicles?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we'll do is look at those type of improvements as we incorporate them into the design. So certainly on Highway 16, interprovincial highway, we're going to be doing a number of passing lanes. That's one area we could look at. Some of the rural highways we can look at as well as putting in blisters for our, that can be used for multi-purpose, whether it's our enforcement or as rest stops. So we can look at that as we do the design on the passing lanes and some of the rural highways.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Terry Hay, who was asking, is Highway number 5 east out of Saskatoon a project we can anticipate being upgraded soon?
So that project's actually currently in contract. We've got a contractor working on 10 kilometers rebuilding the middle piece. The passing lane section is not part of the stimulus, but it's part of our base budget. That'll be tendered this fall as well, and that'll put in place two sets of passing lanes going towards the junction of Highway 2. And then the plan is to do a piece of twinning just east of Saskatoon. So that corridor should be improved over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We have a couple of polls that we are going to conduct throughout this. So I'm going to start the first one, which is about public sector work. So this just asks companies who are on here to tell us what percentage of your work today or traditionally comes from the public sector. So just to take a few minutes and answer that as you all can. The next question, though, is also for you, Fred. It came in the chat feature from Jeff Haggerty, who said, are we going to see any bridge work?
So right now in the stimulus program, there is no bridge work. We do have a large bridge program that's out there. There's going to be a couple of jobs as part of our base budget. It's going to be a couple of large jobs still to be tendered this year. But stay tuned for additional information on that. I won't get any further. I can't comment any further than that.
Okay, thanks, Fred. So Kyle, one of the first questions that we got when this started was, how quickly are we going to see projects out on the street? You talked a little bit about that in the presentation, but do you want to give a little more sense of timing in terms of, because this is not just a short term, well, you know, it's not just a one-year plan, right? And so you want to talk a little bit about the sequencing of this and when people can expect to see work out in the field?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I did touch on it a little bit, but I'll give a bit more information. So it was a very clear strategy that we were trying to employ here with highways going first. You know, they're going to be out to market very quickly. And in fact, a lot of the tender documents are pretty close to ready to go. Would that be correct, Fred? I don't know if you give a head nod, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a number of projects that we're working on to get out to market. So there'll be some spot improvements and I think 1 or 2 TMS projects will be the main things that we start with, in addition to tendering all the other work that we still have to go.
And then in addition to that, the plan is for next week, probably towards the end of the week or maybe the beginning of the following week, we will be starting to roll out the $181 million package, which will range all over Saskatchewan. Geographically, but it will also range by area. So it won't just be for health or education, but you'll also see some parks in there. You'll see some government-owned facilities, some justice facilities. You know, it'll be a range of everything. I can't get into details about the individual projects yet because they haven't formally been approved and announced. We do have obviously a sense about which ones they will be. And I have to tell you, it's very dispersed, very wide array of projects. We didn't want to just focus on one sector, one type of infrastructure. So as soon as the announcements start rolling out, hopefully by the end of next week, the tender packages and anything else in an RFP type format should roll out in the weeks after that. So it's not going to be months from now. We're not going to be rolling things out in November. The intent of this was to get them to market as quickly as possible. With some exceptions, I think there'll be some health projects maybe that will take a bit longer just because of COVID-19, frankly, and access being an issue. But for other projects, we're anticipating to roll out quick.
Thanks, Kyle. Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay, and that's just a standing offer for any of our panelists. If you have anything you want to add, you can always just jump in. We saw from the first poll that we got the results, you know, about 30% were in that 25 to 50% of their work coming from government, about a quarter were less than that and a quarter more than that. So, you know, it's definitely lots of these companies that are here, no surprise, are very dependent on public sector work for their success. Sheldon, we have a series of questions coming in on ICIP, and so maybe I'll come to you first on these. So the first one that we're going to answer or tackle comes from Sean Bayer, who says, with the ICIP deadline being tomorrow, if he understands that correctly, and recommended projects then going to the Fed shortly thereafter, what would be your estimated timeline for the release of approved projects?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Sean, for the question. We're working diligently, and we have since the projects were coming in and the original timeline of March 31st came and went. But we've begun that analysis on those projects. After tomorrow, we'll continue to escalate, and we're accelerating that work to do that analysis. We hope then our intent is over the coming weeks here, and we're saying weeks, that we'll be in a position to recommend projects to Canada. And as Kyle has talked about already, SaskBuilds and the Ministry of Government Relations are working closely and communicating very regularly with Infrastructure Canada and they're indicating an interest as well at supporting stimulus and expediting projects through their approval process. So we're hopeful that there will be projects that can be improved in time for the upcoming construction season.
Mark,
yeah.
I'll just add to that. I didn't talk about the municipal projects that Highways is doing. So normally what we do is we take an intake on the program we currently have through SARM every year. We're way oversubscribed. We have way more projects than we have money. But what we've been able to do, because there's more money going to be allocated, we basically already have a set of projects that we're going to approve and let the RMs know right away that they're going to be able to go ahead with that work. So that work, I think, will be able to come on the market very quickly on the municipal side. And I think they are going to do another intake in May sometime, but there will be a series of projects being approved that'll be able to get out on the market very quickly through the RMs. And that's mainly rural roads.
Okay, thanks. Anybody want to add anything to that? The next question, I'm just reading through this, comes from Ryan King. It's around ICIP as well. Yeah, okay, I think it's just an elaboration on the last question in terms of timing. So I think we've answered that. So I think that's okay. Okay, here's one from Keith Moan for Fred. So will this funding expedite any of the work currently being done or considered on the Saskatoon Freeway project?
No, this has no impact on the Saskatoon Freeway project. I mean, we're 10 to 15 years away from construction on that. The work on that is continuing. I think we're pretty well close to being done the north piece for the functional planning, and we're moving off to the east side of Saskatoon, but this has no impact on that project.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question for you, Kent, to start anyway, from Eric Anderson. What is the status of the NWPTA procurement sections being reviewed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good question. So we've been reaching out to our newest partnership trade agreement partners to see if we could make a change to that agreement to basically put the procurement provisions on hold for a period of time in relation to the COVID stimulus work that we're all doing. So those conversations are happening, but until we can actually, to make a change to that agreement, you need to get agreement of all four of those parties. And so we're not there yet, but those conversations are continuing the last few weeks, and I'm even having more conversations this week and probably next week as well. So until until an agreement is reached, the agreement and those provisions remain in effect. And so what I think we're trying to do on the procurement side through the work of Kyle and Fred and other agencies is really think about how we can maximize the local content while at the same time minimizing risk of a challenge under the agreements. And then if we do get the agreements changed, that's just for the better. But we certainly think we can do a lot more that is lower risk from a trade perspective. But obviously, if we can get some changes specifically in those agreements, that reduces that risk even further. I don't know, Kyle, if you have anything you want to add to that.
The only thing I would add is that we're putting resources to it too. I mean, working within trade agreements to find flexibility is hard work. It doesn't come through prayer and hope. It comes through hard work. And so we need to work with industry on looking at all the options that we have on the table to ensure Saskatchewan companies get a fair shake here. I would say that there's been a lot of work done in the past couple of years since Priority Saskatchewan was created, but there's probably a lot more we can do, and we're looking at all those options right now.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to launch the next poll here, which is on current capacity. So this asks for the companies on the line, what percentage of your total available capacity does your current workload represent? So just asking where you're at today in terms of your capacity. While we do that, and while people start to answer that, we have two questions here, one from Curtis and one from Vince, that are basically asked the same thing. So we're going to ask both of them here at once. Kyle, we'll start with you on this one. Could you clarify what Saskatchewan company means?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that at this point in time, we don't have a clear definition, and that's on purpose, frankly, right now. We don't want to, I guess, prevent anyone from considering themselves a Saskatchewan company. But what we've done through community benefits is we focused on Saskatchewan labor. And in most cases, Saskatchewan companies employ Saskatchewan labor. And from a trade agreement standpoint, it's very blatantly offside to say that we are only allowing Saskatchewan companies to bid. So that's why we haven't really focused too much on what a Saskatchewan company definition is. There are some key things that we look at, of course, when we're thinking about Saskatchewan companies, no different than all of you on the phone. But we felt that a softer way to get at it was still getting good outcomes is to focus on Saskatchewan citizens and Saskatchewan labor. So we'll see. I mean, we're going to try. We're going to go down this path. Fred has already gone down this path with some success. But it doesn't mean that we're done trying. We're going to keep looking at ways that we can stay above bar with trade agreement while still getting some really good outcomes. So we do want to also look at associations, construction associations and the engineering associations. So we've been having close conversations with Mark's group, with Chantel Lip and the Heavy Construction Association, Karen Lowe and Merritt, and also Bev with ACEC. And we want your thoughts on what Saskatchewan is as well.
Okay, anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. Then, let's build off of that, Kyle, a little bit for you and Fred here on the community benefit piece. So here's a question from Jason, who said, MHI recently announced a community benefit component in their proposal evaluations. You guys already covered this. Jason's perspective is however, that it's too small, 20% on Saskatchewan content and 40% on price, allows large out-of-province companies to use SK projects to keep staff in other provinces busy. How can we ensure local resident SK people are doing this stimulus work? It is best value for Saskatchewan taxpayers that Saskatchewan residents do all the work in the province and not export this work to large national companies. We have the engineering and construction skills to do this work locally. So how can we ensure local resident SK people are doing this stimulus work? And do you want to maybe just provide some of the context for why you decided to experiment this way with what you did and your thoughts in terms of how it's working so far?
Yeah, so Kyle, I can start, I guess, because I was involved in some of the discussions that we did on this. So I think where we started is that if I look at how we currently, let's start with construction, because that's where it came from. So we use construction as the model. So in construction, we typically were awarding 75 points for price and 25 points for other things when we did a construction contract. So by introducing community benefits, and we actually now community benefits are close to 20%, prices down to 63%. We include other factors in that. So, at the end of the day, the taxpayers of Saskatchewan still are, we're willing to pay a premium to have Saskatchewan labor. So what's the balance on what's the right premium that we're going to pay? So I think we kind of took that into account as we were trying to determine what is the right, balance between, technical expertise, price, and then community benefits. So we kind of trying to figure out what is that right balance to be able to handle that as we go forward. Is it the right mix right now? I don't know, but what we'll do is continue to evaluate it, and as we go forward, we'll make adjustments and may make modifications to it depending on how we're seeing what the results are.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I would say too. Is that we're starting where we are. But it doesn't mean that we're going to continue with that exact regime forever and ever. We do need to adjust, and feedback from industry is important so that we can adjust. We're going to have some results come through in the near term here on the first set of community benefits. We think it's within trade agreement above bar. I don't think we're excluding anybody from bidding from other jurisdictions, but we are, in my opinion, ensuring that Saskatchewan companies get a very strong advantage, being that they employ Saskatchewan people. So we'll adjust. We're going to take feedback. We have to have trade agreements at this point in time in place, subject to the work that Kent's doing with his team. And there's some responsibilities that we have because of that. We're trying to be creative, and I think we're going to see some positive outcomes from it.
Yeah, I guess one more thing, on the couple of jobs that have closed until now, and I won't get into the details of the ones that have closed, but the ones that have closed, we've seen two extremes. So one is contractors in Saskatchewan don't do that type of work. So people bid that they were going to be doing the work with, zero local labor. right? Which is to be expected because people in Saskatchewan don't do that work. And that's where we need to work with Kyle over the next coming months on supplier development for that type of work, so that we do have Saskatchewan vendors that will do this work for us. And we know what those areas are. So we'll work aggressively with Saskatchewan vendors that want to get into that business, hopefully, to provide some opportunities for Saskatchewan labor to bid on that type of work. On the other type of projects that we've seen, the companies that have bid it have got maximum points on the local involvement. So, you know, so far we're seeing that people are, you know, the ones where the contractors have actually picked this, I'm going to use 100% Saskatchewan labor on a couple of jobs that we've seen. So we'll continue to monitor this and make adjustments as we go forward. I'm sure it's not perfect, and we'll have hiccups, and we'll adjust as we go forward.
Maybe just to add my thoughts on
ahead, please.
Mark.
Yeah.
You know, I think that development by highways, in terms of that proportion, is pretty significant. And as Kyle and Fred have both said, we're going to see how it goes. And we're just trying to balance that with our trade agreement obligations, which we do get benefits from as well. I mean, we're one of the most trade dependent provinces in one of the most trade dependent countries in the world, 1 million people. And so we do have to, you know, import lots of stuff and export lots of stuff. And so we're just trying to get that balance right between making sure that we have as free as an open trade as we can, while at the same time maximizing the opportunities and benefits for our companies.
Okay, thanks, Kent. I'm just going to share the results from that last poll. They're actually kind of all over the map. I was a little surprised to see that the highest one was 51 to 75% capacity, because I know that when we asked this poll of our members a couple of weeks earlier, that number was a little lower, but that tells you that there's still lots of excess capacity. So only less than 10% of the industry is operating at more than 75% capacity. So no surprise there, but that's what that tells us. So I want to, there was a question here from Dan who, and this builds off of the discussion we were just having, and this is an implication that I've heard suggested from others, and I'd like feedback from the panelists on it. So is the Saskatchewan resident system actually going to be, so he was talking about the local labor component, going to be important enough to score a Saskatchewan company over another, i.e. the way it is now, the Sask first percentage is so small that it doesn't affect award. Now it's 20%, and I don't know that I agree with the idea that that's not large enough, but I'm wondering if you guys can share from your experience, you know, why that 20% threshold was the right threshold to pick to start.
Yeah, I mean, Fred, I'm sure you have some comments on this, but what I will say is, as a former bidder, and I did work in the private sector for quite some time before this job, 20% is usually pretty significant. You know, usually the difference between winning and losing is a couple percentage points. So we do anticipate on a lot of different types of infrastructure, maybe not only roads, but other types too, 20% is going to tip the scales, frankly. Maybe 20 is not appropriate. Maybe it's 25. Maybe it's 30. Maybe we can have that discussion. Maybe we'll experiment with some of that. But we do believe that it's very significant, as Kent pointed out and Fred alluded to as well. But we're not done trying different things. And just community benefits is one tool, but there's other tools that we want to use as well, including having our companies involved at a very early stage, even before we develop the RFP, right? And so there's other things that we're going to start working on that require some resources, but we've put a team together to start doing that. I'll leave it at that. Fred, I'm sure you have some comments too.
Yeah, the other comment I can make is that, you know, we have seen situations where, you know, 5% for safety or 10% for past performance, which is some other factors that we use, has tipped the scale between somebody who's going to win the job with the lowest price or not. So when you introduce community benefits at 20%, that is a significant portion of the overall score. You know, on the consulting side is 40% price, 40% technical, 20% community benefits. On the contract side, it's about 60% price, roughly 20% community benefits, and safety and past performance are in there. So it will make a difference where, you know, I think we've done some modeling, and at the end of the day, you could have somebody who has, with their community benefit score, could have a bid that's, you know, a couple $1 million higher, depending on the value of the job, a couple $1 million higher, and end up winning the job if they have local involvement versus a contractor that has no local involvement. So if you have no local involvement and a lower price, somebody with a higher price can overtake that person with a community benefit. So I think it is a significant portion. The 20% is fairly significant from some of the things we've seen. And as I said, we've only got a couple of contracts that have closed right now. We'll continue to monitor this. Every one that closes, we'll monitor and see what that looks like. And if we have to make adjustments, we'll make adjustments.
Okay, thanks, Fred. So there's a lot of questions on this theme. One from Leon said, when you talk about Saskatchewan labor, are you including only, he said, trade labor, but on-site labor, or does that also account for office and admin labor?
So I can comment on this. So what we've done on the construction contracts, it includes the prime contractor, all of their subcontractors. And we have worked with SHC on the definition, and the way the construction contracts are set up, it's for people that are spending more than 75% of their time on the construction site. So that's the way it's set up for construction projects. With the consulting industry, what we've done is said anybody who's working on that project. So if you're billing time to that project, you count as Saskatchewan or non-Saskatchewan.
But at this point in time, we haven't included all the overhead stuff, Fred, right?
That's correct. We're just looking at direct wages and overtime or payments in lieu of overtime. That's the only thing we're including in this, not the overheads or any of that type of stuff.
I think where you're probably going with this, Leon, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is the company located in Saskatchewan or not, and is the head office here or not, would be my guess. And so that's something that we could look at, but we haven't gone that far at this point in time.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, although we'll be back on this theme soon, to Kent. I think this was a question that came up in a business council call we had yesterday, Kent. What is being done or considered to be done to monitor or stop COVID-19 transmission into Saskatchewan by out-of-province workers?
Yeah, so there's obviously principles in place for anybody entering Saskatchewan to monitor their symptoms and self-isolate if they're showing symptoms. I think the biggest restrictions right now that are in place are obviously on the international side, where that's very restricted. But that's one of the things that we are having conversations with our Ministry of Health on is what types of restrictions should be put on people entering and exiting the province. Right now, we want to make sure that, for things like transportation and shipment of critical goods, that is flowing as easily as possible. And then in terms of the question about whether people need to self-isolate on entering the province, haven't really gone there yet. I know Manitoba's done some of that for limited periods of time, and that would then involve, of course, like anybody entering the province, whether they're a Saskatchewan resident or Alberta resident or a Manitoba resident. And so I don't think we've really gone there yet, unless Kyle or Fred have different intel on that one in particular.
Well, just a little bit. And Fred and I worked on something with Manitoba on this because our industry was very concerned about a 14-day isolation period that Manitoba put on. But what we found through conversation with their senior leadership was that it doesn't deal with routine work or transportation or things like that. And so we don't anticipate there being any issues with our contractors at this point in time going over to Manitoba, or for that matter, contractors going across border along the border to do, grass cutting, for instance, for highways or something of that nature. We do not have a health order right now restricting or mandating somebody to self-isolate from out of province for 14 days. That may change. Right now, we don't have that health order like Manitoba does.
Okay, anybody want to add anything to that?
Well,
go ahead, Rick.
Conversations that I've had with the DM of Transportation in Manitoba when we talked about this, his indication was that even though the health order is there, they are not actively enforcing it. So, it's in place, but I'm not sure that they're monitoring it really aggressively like they are. Like in Saskatchewan, you can actually get fined if you're not following the protocol under the health authority. In Manitoba, I don't believe that they were doing that, from what I've been told.
Just as an aside here, Kent, we got a note from June in the question and answer that said some of their Saskatchewan mining clients have restricted workers from out of province travel or workers traveling through major airports during this stage of COVID-19 on their sites. So any line of sight on provincial direction on this would be helpful. So just letting you know, that's not really a question, but just a comment. Okay, Sheldon, and this one I think would be Sheldon and Fred. I just gotta find it here again. There's a bunch of acronyms in here, but I'm hoping you guys will know what all the acronyms mean. So with the MREP program, MEREP program, some RMs have closed roads due to zero internal capital budgets. With this stimulus package and RIRG only providing funding if RMs add money, won't some critical projects, i.e. bridge replacements, not proceed forward as the RMs do not have sufficient finances?
So MREP is the old program, RIRG is the new one. So I talked about the $46 million for municipal roads. That is the fund, the province will put in $500,000 and the municipality has to put in the rest. But I believe Sheldon can comment on the extra funding that's through that MEEP program, whether or not that would help the municipalities come up with their component of the funding to be able to deliver that work.
Absolutely, Fred. The MEEP program, municipalities are going to start getting their packages, if not tomorrow, certainly on Tuesday. So we're standing that program up very quickly. You can find details on it if you're interested right now at saskatchewan.ca by searching the Municipal Economic Enhancement Program. There's also all of the per capita allocations are on the website as well. And so not only are we hoping and certainly know that MEEP is going to stimulate projects, and municipal roads, of course, is an eligible category that you can see on the website under that program. But we also think that the accelerating of the $278 million in record level of funding under the municipal revenue sharing program is very unconditional. And while I'll say it's unconditional, we know that there are municipalities that will use it for maintenance, rehabilitation, and related projects as part of their overall spending plans in any given year. So I think there's a couple of pieces there. We are hearing direct that are saying the stimulus announcements for both MEEP and the accelerated payments for their revenue sharing came at a very opportune time because they were contemplating their cash flow issues going forward. And in fact, these programs are going to help them keep on track and keep moving with their current plans to do projects this year as well as into next year. So that was certainly positive feedback we're hearing already. Last point I'll make on the MEEP dollars, the Municipal Economic Enhancement Program, is that the whole intent of it is to be stimulus. So we're asking municipalities to get those very short project plan and the funding street. So we fully to municipalities beginning in the next couple of weeks into June. And we'll have the funds fully expensed and in the hands of municipalities under that program, that $150 million by the end of July or certainly early August, because we've got a deadline on the process to submit their funding agreements back to us by no later than July. That'll help RMs on that side as well.
Okay, thanks, Sheldon. Okay, we've got just under 25 minutes left. We got 24 questions. We're not going to get through all the questions. I know there are more coming in, so that's fine. Those questions that we can't get to, we will try and get answers to after the fact. We're going to get through what I think can be a couple of rapid fire ones though, but as we do that, I'm going to put the next poll up. So poll number 3, which is about expanding capacity. How quickly could you double your current workload without increasing your pricing? Okay, Kyle, will all projects be posted on Sask tenders?
Yes, they will. Yep.
Okay. Kyle and maybe Miguel or others, what is the project delivery strategy for the 2021-2022 capital projects, i.e. schools, hospitals? Will they be tenders, P3s, et cetera? So can you just talk a little bit about sort of the procurement methodologies that'll be used? I know this isn't a rapid fire question, but if you can provide some info on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, the large majority of the $181 million maintenance slash rehab projects will be traditional builds. A lot of the engineering and architectural services work is already done or very close to wrapping up. There's some exceptions to that, but those will mostly be traditional type builds. For the $1.37 billion fund, we have to do procurement options analysis as required by our policies before determining that. Large majority of projects will be more traditional or shades of traditional, like design build potentially, or integrated project delivery, where we're bringing on the contractors a lot earlier in the process. And so I don't anticipate, there will be major design, build, finance, operate, maintain type initiatives out of that 1.37 billion, but there could be a couple that we're considering. They're all subject to approval, of course, by cabinet.
Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. Will the local knowledge or local consideration factors apply to consultants as well?
100%, yes. We're still working out the details on what we're going to be putting in on that, but we have experience doing this on previous large jobs using local knowledge provisions, and we continue to do that in the future.
Okay, and then building off of that, to ensure that consultants are ready to provide services for these projects, will you be releasing the specific skill sets that these projects will be requiring? This will greatly help in supplier development, specifically for suppliers who do not have prior relevant experience.
What I will say on that, and Fred, you can add from a highway standpoint, is that we anticipate to do some market outreach. I talked about industry solicitation or consultation in advance of finishing our procurement documentation. So there will be signals sent, meeting with ACEC tomorrow, send some of those signals as well. We don't want the first time industry sees the scope of work to be on SAS tenders.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'll add is that last week and I talked about the type of work. So I think the Association of Consulting Engineers that works for us is very familiar. When we say we're going to do a TMS project or a passing project, they know exactly what that is. So I think they're pretty well positioned to be able to deliver that work for us. It's the routine type work we do all the time with them.
So here's a question that I know is something that's been on your mind from the very beginning, Kyle. It comes from Terry. Large construction projects traditionally take a long duration to go from concept to construction. To get the construction trades back to work sooner than later, what can we do to stimulate the construction industry with smaller projects? And I know that's a big part of exactly what's been designed here. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was by design that we created the $181 million package and also the $150 million meet to get work started on those two packages as soon as possible to get industry moving. For Saskatchewan, based on my experience, $300 and some million for those two plus $300 million for highways is a good chunk of change. That will really make an impact on industry capacity. We feel, but those large projects, the focus over the short term is for engineering and architects to get those projects ramped up and ready to go for next construction season. So as we do the $181 million and the $300 million for highways and the $150 million for meat, we will be planning for those large initiatives so that they start hitting the market next year and then smooth out over the 3 years after that. So really, we mapped it all out in an analytics tool and feel like it's a pretty smooth spend, over $1 billion a year for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I guess I'd add that on the plan is to basically get all of the, as I said, all of the design work done so that we can tender work and get crushing done over the winter. So except for maybe some of the passing lanes, all of the other work will hopefully get tendered by Christmas time. Is kind of the target.
And so, I think there's some misunderstanding here because I mean, there's some questions about feeling like all of this is big project work that's going to go to large multinationals. I don't think that's the sense at all. But maybe it's because we're talking big dollar values in the project envelopes, right? but those envelopes are intended to be used on lots of projects, both big and small, and probably a lot more small projects than big ones, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, and you know, I wish that I could put up the list today of the 181 and the, you know, the, I guess, prospective list of the 1.3 billion, but I can't. But what I will say is that the $181 million for rehab projects, there's a lot of projects on that list. Like, it's not like there's 5 projects, right? There's a lot. So most of them are smaller initiatives, kind of $1 million, probably in that range. And there's some that are probably in the $10 million range too. But I don't think, Miguel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's anything on that list that's over 25 or over 30 million.
Yeah, no, that's right, Kyle. I think while we can't talk about the specific projects, I guess I would talk about the process that went into getting those projects onto the list. We have been consulting deeply with the ministries responsible for delivering them. The projects that they brought forward are ones they're ready to go on. There are things that they're in their capital asset plans and that are shovel ready or at least design ready, so to speak. So there's been a lot of thought and effort put in from our partner ministries in the design of this. So we're looking forward to announcing them, and I think they'll get rolling very quickly.
Mark, I'll just jump in with a comment here as well.
Please.
On the municipal economic enhancement program, that's, as we've said, is going to move quickly, and it has to be a spend that's going to be completed within just less than 24 months here. We expect all of those dollars to be expensed. So by March 31st of 2022. But I will add particularly to the question of size of projects. If you look at the per capita allocations that are posted online, you'll see that the dollar values for communities range from $1,400 all the way to $35 million. So there's a lot of spread in there. And there's certainly, we anticipate there to be a lot of smaller level projects that are doing rehab, maintenance, refurbishment, to everything all the way through to full construction work. So we're hoping that the design of that program is going to really maximize and optimize contributions to stimulus.
Thanks, Sheldon. I'm just going to share the results from that last poll. So as you can see, 38% of participants said they could double their workload without increasing pricing in the first month, and another 36% within 3 months. So you know, that's a large percentage of the respondents that within 3 months can double capacity. So I know those were questions that were important for the government to understand, and good to see those results. So building off of what the conversation here about project selection, we had a question from Ryan Leach who said, who's basically asking whether or not government is open to hearing about possible project ideas from the private sector. So even if those projects aren't necessarily on their radar screens yet, I know in other jurisdictions there are opportunities for the private sector to propose project ideas and propose solutions to that. Is there a mechanism for that in Saskatchewan, and if there isn't, is there openness to it?
So I'll start with that. I mean, typically we're very open to having conversations, but we don't. We have an unsolicited proposal policy, and typically that's to listen and then put it out to market should it be a priority of government. So we don't really, you know, we can't sole source in most cases. Some cases maybe we would look at it, but the unsolicited proposal type policy leads to review, and then if it's seen as a priority of government, then it would have to go to market.
So there is that opportunity through the unsolicited proposal.
We welcome.
If somebody was interested in that, should they reach out to you guys at SaskBuilds for more details about how to proceed?
Absolutely. And the other thing that's important too in that is lots of times there's fairly significant private sector projects that will impact a local market. So we have been getting lists from some architectural firms, for instance, on, you know, what's going on in Prince Albert, for example. There's no surprise to everyone on the phone. It's been announced that Prince Albert Victoria Hospital is on our list and coming to market soon. We also have the city of Prince Albert going forward with a large recreational facility at the same time. So if there's also 2 major commercial buildings going up in a major mining project just outside the city border, we want to know that. So I would suggest that some of it is coming forward with ideas for government, but some of it's also understanding the pulse of the industry, generally speaking, so that we can make the right decisions and not overburden a certain area of the province.
Okay, thanks. I want to ask a question about municipal projects. We had a question in here from Darren who talked about the city of Regina had canceled some road rebuild projects due to funding. Will these restart? I know that you can't answer that question. That's something that city of Regina has to answer. But I want to, so I'll ask that question about how the intention of this is to stimulate growth and to stimulate the economy, and the intention of that is to ensure capital projects continue. So how will that message be communicated to municipalities in terms of the importance of doing that? And that's part one of the question. And part two is the city of Regina in particular, but other municipalities have a tendency to deliver some of this work using their own forces. So not contracting out the work, but delivering it with their own staff. Certainly that's not very popular with the private sector, and doesn't, in our opinion, stimulate the economy in the way it's intended here. So curious about what messaging, if any, will be provided by the province on both the importance of continuing projects and the importance of contracting that work out. And Sheldon or Kyle or anybody.
Well, I can start. There's a couple questions in there. But one of the things that I would say is that the province typically doesn't tell municipalities what they should and shouldn't do on capital. We listen to them, obviously, through programs like Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. We're well aware of them using local forces. There's a couple cities in Saskatchewan that tend to gravitate towards that. I guess they feel it's more aligned to their needs. I don't know why, but it happens. Through the Municipal Economic Enhancement Program, Sheldon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we want to actually expense that money this year. And from an accounting standpoint, if we put a whole bunch of restrictions on capital dollars, we can't expense in a given year. We have to actually expense as projects are built. And being that this is economic stimulus, we actually want this cash in municipal hands, and therefore we're leaving it more unconditional. Do we want them to use private sector forces like we do in the province of Saskatchewan, like Fred does for highways? Yes, because we think it's the most efficient and effective way of doing business, which is why we do it. But will we direct them or mandate municipalities to do it? We just won't. And Sheldon, I don't know if I'm off there, but I of course have experience in government relations as well for 5 or 6 years. So unless things have changed.
Right, Kyle. We certainly want to balance with getting good projects, and in the situation that we're in, there aren't a lot of conditions on it. There's, as you can see, if you go to the NEAT program, you'll see the 14 categories of eligible projects is intended to be very broad. We have been messaging, we'll continue to message to municipalities that this is stimulus, it's clear. And we hope the combination of that flexibility and the speed of moving it out. We also know that in addition to our encouragement as a ministry, as Kyle has touched on, we know that local voters, the business community, your industry associations and others are watching too. And, but the program does allow for the autonomy of the local elected officials to make the decisions that support their communities. So if you have particular concerns, we always strongly encourage people to engage with their municipal councils and get involved in that business. If you want to try and help influence make on absolutely support development.
Sorry, I'll just add that on the, I hope Sheldon was done. It's kind of, the computer's kind of I'll just add that on the highway component for municipal funding, because it is project-based, we are in conversations with municipal SARM about whether or not they would look at incorporating some of the community benefit provisions that we use. So we are having those conversations right now. We'll see where that ends up, but that is something that we are talking to them about would they be, could we make that part a mandatory part of the program? So we're having that conversation right now.
Excellent. Okay, I've got maybe 5-6 more minutes and then we'll wrap up, because I know Fred has a hard stop and I know lots of us do as well. So here's a question from Tim from the community of Lloydminster. For those of us with offices in Lloydminster, are we a Saskatchewan company or an Alberta company? And I've been getting that question a lot from people in Alberta, wondering how they're going to be evaluated or considered there. So I don't know who would like to take a crack at that.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I went earlier, where it gets really confusing on how you dictate to the market what's Saskatchewan, what isn't. You know, and that's why we focused on Saskatchewan labor as opposed to Saskatchewan companies at this point in time. Doesn't mean we won't change that, but it adds so much complexity, and you get companies saying, and I've heard this, I'll be honest with everyone, you know, I'm a Saskatchewan company. Well, hold on, I'm more Saskatchewan than you because of X, Y, and Z. And then the next guy or gal saying, well, hold on, I've been here since 1901. I'm the most Saskatchewan. It's just a really tough conversation. And it's frankly one that I don't necessarily is required to get a certain outcome. The outcome we want is to ensure our economy is strong and for these dollars to benefit our economy. So we feel at this point in time, using Saskatchewan labor as a proxy to get there, Saskatchewan citizens as a proxy to get there, will lead us to that good outcome that we want on economic development for our region of Canada. Fred, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, I think you covered it, Kyle. I think you got it.
Kent, I got a couple of questions here on the interprovincial trade agreements and the risk of being challenged. One was saying, you know, was there a strategic reason why we emphasized in the media that the focus of this plan would be to hire local? Didn't that highlight this fact to other jurisdictions and set up opportunities for early challenges? And a similar question said, you know, is there risk that the community benefit is going to be challenged due to interprovincial trade agreements?
Yeah, so in response to the first question, you know, my perspective is that, you know, this was going to become evident through the tendering process anyway. And so I think it was, you know, fine for government to communicate that. I think it was an important message to send to our business community and to our workers and just people that are struggling with the current economic circumstance. So does that increase the risk? You know, potentially, but I mean, you know, companies were going to become aware of those community benefits measures anyway. And so, you know, I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it represented a significant increase in the threat of a challenge. I would say the threat of a challenge is, you know, is real. And that's, you know, in part why we want to adjust the trade agreements if we can. But we also think it's a manageable risk. And we think that, you know, Highways and SaskBuilds has done a really good job in terms of how they've positioned that. And I think the local labor component and angle is not only good from the perspective that Kyle highlighted about, you know, getting to that ultimate economic impact we're looking for, but also to help minimize that threat of a trade challenge as well. So I would say, you know, if the trade agreements do not get adjusted, there is the threat of a challenge. You know, should we be challenged under New West Partnership Trade Agreement? There's a process that people have to go through. There's a panel hearing that can be requested. We would present our case, they would present theirs. There would be some sort of adjudication. We would then have the opportunity to adjust our policies moving forward. So there'd be a bit of a process that would have to go through before we got to that point. So that would be my perspective on those two. I don't know if Fred or Kyle have anything they want to add to that.
Well, I'll just add that within, I think, hours of the, you know, the tender being changed with an addendum to incorporate community benefits, I was getting phone calls. So it doesn't take long for people to understand what's going on and to start asking why. And, you know, the threat of a challenge is going to be there as soon as you put it out in the documents, to be honest with you. So I think this way it made it easier for us to defend, to say this is why we're doing it. Is we're doing it to create jobs. And so that's the rationale behind this. So it made it a lot easier for us to have that conversation with whoever phones us.
Yeah, I won't add much except to say that, you know, I agree with what Kent and Fred said. This was an opportunity for us to try something different. We believe it's above bar for trade agreement. Is there a risk? Yeah, probably. There's always going to be a risk. I tell you, with the letters I received too and the emails, I could tell you there's a risk. So people might not think that we're going far enough on this call, but I have to tell you that others in other jurisdictions have a very different perspective. And we're trying our best to find that middle ground. I think we've done a pretty good job so far, but we'll adjust accordingly to meet needs of industry and meet needs of our province, which is, again, desired outcome is economic development in a very, very tough situation created by this pandemic. So let's keep working together. This isn't a SaskBuilds or a Highways or a trade and export development or a municipal affairs government relations thing. This is a Saskatchewan thing, and you're part of that as industry, frankly.
Okay, last question before we wrap up, and I think Fred, this was something that from what I understand, the Ministry of Highways approach to community benefits did include. But one of the challenges in construction is that a lot of the work on site is done by trade contractors, not necessarily by the general contractors who have the contractual relationship with the owner. How is this approach to local procurement going to proceed to ensure that work is done by local trade contractors and local suppliers and others that aren't in that direct contractual relationship?
So it has to include the commitment that they make includes their own their own staff as well as any of their subcontractors or subconsultants. So it's flowed down. So they have to make that declaration. If they say they're going to have 100% Saskatchewan labor on the job, it's not just their staff, but also all of their subcontractors, subconsultants, whoever's working on that project. They have to include that.
And would that be the intention, Kyle, for non-highways work?
That's right. And I don't know that we'll use it for everything, but we do plan on using it for vertical infrastructure as well. The other thing to add to Fred, and I think he's mentioned this before, is they're going to have to attest that they're doing this, and then they will have to report on it after. And if they don't, there's actually a fine structure, a fee structure built into the contract as well that actually leads to real dollars. So it's not just about them saying, yes, we'll do it. It's about them actually reporting and us auditing the fact that they did. And if they didn't, there's a penalty.
And penalties are quite severe. I mean, if you look at on the consultant side, it can be up to 10% of the value of the contract. And on a construction contract, it can be up to 5% of the value of the contract. And those penalties were set in consultation with ACBC and the Saskatchewan Heavy Construction Association. So we originally had a penalty regime and they said those aren't strong enough. You need to have higher penalties. So we listened to them and adjusted them accordingly. And I guess the other thing that I would add is as we've gone through this community benefit provisions, certainly we worked within government, but we also work very closely with SHCA and ACEC on how we're going to incorporate it. So we haven't just done this on our own. We've had extensive consultations with both of those association groups.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here. Kyle, I'll give the last word to you. But just before we do that, I want to thank all of our panelists, Sheldon, Miguel, Fred, Kent, and Kyle for making time to be here. Thank all of our participants and just acknowledge the Saskatchewan Business Council again for hosting this. This session has been recorded and will be available later today online for those who either weren't able to participate or those who were that want to follow up. And we have about 15 or 16 questions left in the Q&A. We'll go through that, make sure that we send those questions to the panelists for follow-up if they need it. Some of them have already been answered, and we'll get those answers back out to the individuals who asked the questions. So thanks for everyone who did that. Kyle, last word goes to you.
Yeah, well, I just say thanks to my panelists, my fellow colleagues, and also thanks to everyone that gave their time today for this opportunity. And I use the word opportunity on purpose because we do view conversations like this with industry as a very significant opportunity, and we welcome it in the future. So thanks so much for setting this up, Mark, and the Business Council, and keep the dialogue open, folks, and we'll obviously get some good outcomes.
Okay, thanks everyone. Take care.